I was taking tens of thousands of images, and in 2007 is when I basically bought a camera for the first time.
What's the hardest part about building a company?
I had no wife, no kids, so I lost like 95% of my income.
I did challenge myself to 50,000 steps.
And I was out in the desert for 5 days.
When you run a marathon, you need to consume.
All the contracts I had were canceled.
Reinventing yourself every few years. Welcome to the Willpower Podcast. All right, Gary, let's start with photography. So just tell me a little bit about how you started.
I started because I sold all my stuff, my home, and set out to travel around the world in 2007. And I purchased a camera for the trip that was pretty expensive, thinking that, well, that'll take good photos. And I learned very quickly that that is not how it works. And I had no background in photography, no experience whatsoever. And I basically spent several years incrementally trying to improve my craft. One of the things I did is, this is before Instagram or any social media platform really, is I started posting a photo every day on my website. And that was an exercise that was really helpful because it made my work public. And I think it's very easy to just go and practice, I don't want people to see it. But when you make your work public, you kind of is an incentive to be better because people will see it and they will judge it. And I just, thankfully, when I was traveling around the world, I had several, I was doing it for years, and I had a lot of opportunities to take really good photos because I was in beautiful places. And so I was getting in a lot of reps. I was taking tens of thousands of images, and eventually I got to a point where I started submitting for awards and I started winning them. And there were 3 times where I was named Travel Photographer of the Year in North America. And that was from 2013, 14, and 15. And in 2007 is when I basically bought a camera for the first time. So I went from that to that point in a period of 5 years.
What's that like to be like recognized like that? Was it expected or was it a big surprise?
No, not at all. The first time, so these things are subjective, right? I mean, it's photography. It's not the 100-yard dash. The first time I won, I was in Namibia and I was out in the desert for 5 days. And I remember coming back and I went to a internet cafe in Swakopmund and I checked my email and there were all these emails like, congratulations, congratulations. And I was like, well, what? I didn't know what I was being congratulated for. And I eventually realized that I had won the Society of American Travel Writers Bill Munster Award, which is their highest award they give photographers. And what was even more surprising was, I didn't know that they were announcing it while I was doing this, was that nobody knew who I was when they announced it. So they do this at their annual convention. They're like, who's this? Because I was the first blogger, electronic media guy to join this organization, which was the top organization for travel writers and travel photographers. And so I wasn't in the normal loop or in the community that a lot of these people were. So it kind of took everyone by surprise.
Right. You kind of came from outside of the system and then interesting. So you get into it. What do you think that having the public images that you would post, was that what kept you going? Or was there some other drive that got you through those 10,000 plus pictures that you ended up taking to get to that point?
It's something I kind of became known for as a business. Having the blog and the photography made me well known. And in that world, so when you say you're a travel photographer, the first thing people say is like, oh, you work for National Geographic? Because that's all they know. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to do. The truth is, it's a horrible business. It doesn't make very much. The number of outlets you can sell photos to has shrunk dramatically. And so it kind of wasn't a surprise that someone like me won because the number of traditional travel photographers had shrunk dramatically. And so it was part of my calling card for the business was being able to do quality photography. So it was part of it was part of a business strategy to submit as many awards as I could. I strategically did it. I looked for what won in the past, what they were looking for. I won a lot of stuff. And it helped set me apart from other people that were doing online media. Because the thing is, if you do an assignment for National Geographic, you can basically piggyback off of their reputation, right? Well, I'm a National Geographic photographer. Oh, well, they like you, so you must be good. That's difficult to do online. You can say, oh, I have this many followers or whatever. But when you win some awards, it's a way of kind of saying, okay, well, this organization has kind of said that you're good, so you must be good. So if you want to work for other brands or destinations in the travel space, it was kind of something that I could use that other online people, influencers or whatever, couldn't claim.
So you had mentioned in our previous conversation about selling a tech company, and that was before venture into photography. What was the company, and when did you start it?
Well, I started in 1994, and it was a very company. It was a consulting firm, but we basically did custom web application development. But this was at a time when nobody was really doing that. Hooking up databases to a web page, at first it was all just static HTML pages. And it was difficult to do because a lot of the tools we have today didn't exist. There was no PHP, there was no MySQL, there was none of this stuff. Even Microsoft didn't have, I don't think SQL Server had been launched yet. It was like Microsoft Access, which was just kind of a desktop database. And so I had a friend that created a tool that allowed that there was this brand new operating system called Windows NT. It could run on that, which was designed to be a server platform, which was much cheaper than, say, getting a Sun server or something, which cost a ton of money. Or you didn't need to have a copy of Oracle, which also cost a ton of money, which were really the options because there was only enterprise stuff. So you could do a low-cost thing using a cheap database on Windows NT. His program called Cold Fusion, which is now owned by Adobe, let you do simple scripting on the back end to do things like SQL statements and hook up a database. So he was building this tool. Companies came to him and said, well, we would like to have our company use this. So he didn't actually want to build the websites. He wanted to focus on the tool. So he turned to me and he said, well, do you want to do this? So I was like, sure. So I started doing it. And then I had a friend who had a friend. And next thing you know, I'm 28 years old. We have a company of about 50 people. I sell the company to a pretty big multinational corporation who I later realized they had mostly done consulting at that point, but their background was in mainframe computers from way back in the day. And they were looking to get sold. So I think they bought my company to put like an internet gloss. You got to remember, this is in the late 90s during the dot-com boom. So they could be internet-ish, so they could increase their valuation when they got sold. I didn't realize that at the time. But yeah, so I was 28. I sold the company. I stayed with them for 1 year where they paid me a lot of money and I didn't do anything, and just kind of planned what I was going to do next.
What's the hardest part about building a company, at least in your experience?
When I did it, I was in my 20s, my early 20s, and you don't know a lot of the things you have to do. Like you hire someone, okay? That's easy enough. Here's money. Do something. But then there's like, well, okay, well, how do I do my taxes? And the employees are asking you this. What about FICA? How do you take this stuff out? And I'm like, I don't know. And I knew someone who said, oh, well, there are companies that handle this, payroll companies, and they will handle all that for you. And then they just show up once every 2 weeks with your checks, and then you give the checks to everybody. It's like, wow, that was simple. And there's just a whole bunch of things like that you just don't really. I mean, I had the benefit of being in a hot industry doing internet stuff in the 90s. So I guess there's some part of it that I didn't have to worry about. Later on, so I started a business after that. We had a network of video game websites, and we had a LAN center. I had that right when the dot-com bubble crashed, and that was painful. And I think I had gotten complacent, or I thought that this was really easy. And I think a lot of that may have just been due to the environment that I was in and the industry that I was in. And I didn't have to I didn't realize how difficult it actually was for most people to run a business.
Right. Interesting. And so what came of that burst for you then when the dot-com bubble burst? Did the company stay alive, or what happened?
We were doing great until one day. So we had this network of video game sites. We were doing like 250,000 page views a month. 50 million page views a month. And we were selling our ad inventory through CNET. And then they called us up one day and said, we're pulling the plug. So that went to zero. And then we had to unwind it all. And then eventually LAN gaming. So people used to have LAN parties. They would all bring their computers together because you could play faster on an Ethernet connection than you could over, say, ISDN or DSL or whatever people had at the time. That kind of went away as bandwidth improved and computers improved. So that was an idea that wasn't really long for the world. For a very brief period of time, it was very popular, and we could pack the place with people that wanted to come in because we provided the computers and the network, but it just didn't last that long.
Right. Okay. So then after this company, you have another.
I had invested in another firm from some of my former employees that was a business intelligence software, but I had no day-to-day involvement in that. And then I went to school for a couple of years just for fun. Went and studied geology and geophysics and realized I did not want a career in academia. And then I came up with the idea of traveling around the world. And I thought I'd do that for a year or two, and it turned into 13 years.
Yeah. So how do you make these big life decisions? It seems like there have been a couple, like, going back to podcasts or going to podcasting, going to traveling and photography, starting web companies. How do you make those decisions? Like, this is what I'm going to do.
I don't know. People have often said, like, oh, how do you, I don't know. I just like, all right, this is what I'm going to do now.
It just happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, at least for me, I have to reinvent myself every few years. You have to do something completely different. Mm-hmm. I didn't grow up thinking, oh, I'm going to start an internet consulting firm. No one does. Right. So, I mean, it was fine. It was successful. I did well, but it wasn't really something I wanted to do the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Went into academia, did well, realized it was not something I wanted to do. I had the opportunity at that point. I was in my 30s. I had no wife, no kids. I had some money, so I had the opportunity to travel. So I figured, why not? And I just did.
Yeah. So you talked about like reinventing yourself every few years. What do you think drives that? Why do you feel the need to change everything every so often?
Sometimes it's circumstances. Sometimes it's boredom. I like traveling, so I decided to travel. When I started my travel blog very early, it achieved a lot of success, but then circumstances changed. And what changed was the internet. I started my blog back in 2006, actually, before social media. There was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, none of that stuff. And my website was my social media. People came to the website, they left comments. And that was slowly killed over time by social media, because then people would get your content through Facebook or Twitter or something like that. And then they started putting in algorithmic changes where people who followed you couldn't see your content anymore. Mm-hmm. And then you had to pay to get people to see it. And then what happened is all the bloggers realized their traffic was now all coming from Google. So they all just started writing SEO content. And by the time the pandemic hit, it was something I just didn't want to do anymore, because it wasn't why I got into this. I could write an article about my thoughts traveling around the world about this place and its history. And that kind of died out, because everyone was just writing the 15 best things to do in Las Vegas. SEO content. And I didn't get into this to do SEO content. So when the pandemic hit, and I should say, in March of 2020, within a span of a few weeks, I lost like 95% of my income. Everything that I had going on basically disappeared. All the contracts I had were canceled. It's kind of an act of God thing. All the traffic to my website dried up. All affiliate sales went to zero because nobody was traveling. And I realized that I had to do something else. I couldn't continue to, and I didn't want to either. Like I said, I already had my doubts about where this industry was heading before the pandemic. And it turned out my concerns were really valid, because last year, Google made an algorithm change, and most of the travel bloggers I know that stuck with it saw their traffic drop by like 80%. Like it's just killed the business. Mm-hmm. So I made the shift to podcasting, because podcasting is the one element of the internet that is like it was back in the good old days, where it's not reliant on algorithm. It's primarily word of mouth. And so I just realized this was a good opportunity to do it. Things were bad anyhow, and it would take time. And so I just put my nose to the grindstone and worked on the show.
So before this like SEO phase of blogging, what was the way that you got traffic to your site? Was it just people who already knew you, who were visiting or revisiting, or where did people
Yeah,
come
word
from?
of mouth. There was a lot more blogs would link to each other. They would mention each other. That happened a lot. And then Google killed it because it's like, oh, you can't be doing that linking. That's illegal. And then everyone freaked out and stopped doing it. Everyone became afraid of each other. But back then, nobody cared. You'd have a blog roll on the side of your page, like, here are my friends. Check out their website. Or they would mention an article that you wrote. Some people just did roundups. Here are the best blog posts. And a lot of that just died with social media.
What has been the biggest challenge with starting a podcast from scratch?
It takes time. I'm sure you've heard the stat that most podcasts don't even make it to episode 7, that people just give up. And a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, they were listening to podcasts because they had nothing else to do. So they had this idea that, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. And they eventually give up. And I studied the market a lot before I got into it. I looked at what made successful shows. I looked at reviews for a lot of shows. And you're not really looking for the good reviews. You're looking for the bad reviews. What were the things, then there were 2 things that always stood out with 1-star reviews. People inserting politics into something that was not political, and too many ads. Those are the 2 things. And so I made a decision. I was like, okay, my show is not going to mention politics at all. I'm going to completely shy away from it. There are plenty of outlets for that. I don't need to be another outlet. And I would have 2 ads, and that's it. I was going to put a very hard line. And people still complain about 2 ads. So, but I think 2 is reasonable. The amount of time it takes up is less than the ad load, say, on terrestrial radio or television, and even most popular podcasts. So I sleep well at night. It doesn't really bother me. But it also takes time, precisely because there is no algorithm. You cannot go viral with an audio podcast. It doesn't work that way. It's a slow build. But the good part is, because there is no algorithm, you don't crash back down. You tend to keep your audience. I know a lot of YouTubers that, they'll struggle. They'll put out videos, and then one does really well. And then their instinct is, well, I'm going to do another video on that because that did really well. And the next thing you know, that's all they're doing, right? And it's a form of audience capture or algorithm capture. One of the questions I'm asked quite frequently is, well, what kind of episodes do best? The answer, I don't have an answer to that. They all do the same because people aren't listening to my show necessarily on an episode by episode basis. Because of what the algorithm showed. They're listening because they subscribe to the show and they just download them all, which is a much better place I'd rather be in than having to rely on an algorithm that can change.
Right. Do you use YouTube for putting your podcast out, or just?
I put it up there, but it's audio only, and nobody consumes audio only content on YouTube, so almost no one listens.
Yeah, that is such an interesting point about the algorithm. And yeah, it's that. And then I know like people talk about mailing lists as well. It's like, that's like the only thing you actually own.
For a podcast and an email list are the 2 things you can own, right? And it's not subject to algorithm. And that's why that's powerful. But the thing is, people are consuming YouTube videos. And so they naturally think, oh, you have to be on YouTube. In reality, the CPM rates you get for advertising on YouTube are a fraction of what they are in audio podcasting. And YouTube takes an enormous chunk of it. They take it like half. So the market has kind of spoken as to how they value audio versus YouTube. Also, if you look at completion rates, most people stop watching a video very quickly on YouTube. Very few people make it to the end. Whereas for a show like mine, that's relatively short, people tend to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, all the way through.
That my completion rates are like 90%. And there's much better audio retention because podcasts uniquely fit in a space where nothing else does. You're doing it when you're walking, when you're driving, when you can't be sitting in front of a computer, consuming some other media. And every study I've seen in terms of like retention of content and advertising, podcasts just blow everything else away.
Have you just had a belief in the fact that this would work in the end? In these periods where you were building?
I built the show as the show I wanted to listen to. This is the show I would like. And I figured if I wanted to do that, there are other people out there like me that are curious that would like this show too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it'll ever be the biggest podcast in the world, but I can look at other podcasts in the niche that other big networks run and say, okay, maybe that's the ceiling. And it's still well above where I am. And my show's doing well. It gets, 1.5 million downloads a month, but there's still a lot of room for growth.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful to think in the sense of like, what would I be interested in listening to, and then creating something around that. I mean, I know that's like general advice in entrepreneurship as well, is just like find a pain point in your life, find something that you would want. But it applies here.
You'll hear other podcasters that give advice and they'll talk about creating an avatar.
Mm-hmm.
My avatar is me. I create the shows I'm interested in, and I hope that other people may like it. There's a downside to that. My knowledge is limited. There are certain things that I'm not as well read in, and I don't do as many shows on that for that reason, because I don't know as much about it. Mm-hmm. But so far it's worked.
Do you feel that your podcasting muscle has grown, or your skill in podcasting has developed over time?
Yes, but my skill at doing my show has gotten good.
Sure.
And I don't think there's a general podcasting one. So it used to take me 8 hours to research, write, and record a show. I can do that now in half that time, sometimes even less, depending on the show. So that has definitely gotten better. So I'm more efficient in what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I think I have a better understanding of the audience at this point, or at least what they're interested in. And so, yeah, I think if you do anything enough, I would certainly hope you'd get better at it.
Yeah. I think naturally as humans, like, we're built to learn and we're built to develop. So
I tell people that start podcasts, it's like, some people, they want to wait till it's perfect. I'm like, no, Start today, because no matter what you do, your first episode should be your worst. Because if it's not your worst, that means you're getting worse instead of getting better. Mm-hmm. So just start, and you'll gather some data, you'll learn, you'll figure out where, what you need to improve on. And you can only do that by doing, not planning.
Yes. And then you also get that positive pressure that you talked about with posting pictures on your website, which is, this is out there now. People can see this, and I probably want to improve it because.
And I have gotten, the vast majority of the replies and responses people get from my show are positive. Mm-hmm. But occasionally I'll get people that just like, I don't like this guy's voice. I can hear him breathing. Sorry, but I breathe. We all do. I even did that. I usually read a review at the end of the show. And one day I read 2, and it was one guy that said, you have too much American history. And another guy complained, you don't do enough American history. Like, I don't know what to do to that.
Right. You can't be for everyone. It never work. Okay. Let's talk about self-control. So you mentioned that you're in the middle of a 30-day fast. Do you have any other similar kind of challenges that you've put yourself through like that?
Not like this. So when the pandemic first started, I was living in Minneapolis, and I bought a Fitbit, and I made it a point to walk every day. You've heard about the 10,000 steps. So I would do at least that. I lived right in the Lake District of Minneapolis. So I'd go walk around the lakes and stuff. And I realized that Fitbit had badges. So you'd get like a 10,000 step badge. Then they had a 20,000 step badge, a 40,000 step badge, things like that. But the top badge was 100,000 steps in a day. And that's, depending on your pace and everything, that's somewhere between about 45 to 50 miles walking in a day. So I was like, okay, I think I'm going to do this. And I began training for it. And I got up to about 50,000 steps in a day. And so I had the 100,000 step plan done. So what I was going to do is like wake up at around 2 a.m. and just walk until I was done, whenever that would be. And whenever I hit the 100,000th step, I would just call an Uber and go home after that. But I never ended up doing it because I ended up moving. There was a whole lot of unpleasantness in Minneapolis in the summer of 2020. Uh-huh. And I was right in the middle of it. And my neighborhood kind of burned to the ground. And after all that, nothing was happening. Nothing was being fixed. I just got a U-Haul one day and I put all my stuff in it, and I notified my landlord that I was gone, and he was free to do what he wanted. I still had like 4 months left on my lease, and I just left. And I would think about going back to trying something like that again, because it's quite a challenge. But that would be the closest I've done to something like what I'm doing now in terms of an extended fast.
Yeah. Funny enough, I'm from St. Paul, and my parents live right by university. So we were like right in the midst of the St. Paul version of all that.
I went to McAllister.
Oh, nice. Cool. And yeah, I did last summer, I did challenge myself to 50,000 steps. And that was like a full day of hiking, walking, and just like, okay, after dinner walk.
It's not as easy as it seems. And I remember doing some of those where my feet really hurt by the end of the day. And it really was something that I think you needed to kind of be conditioned to do. It's like a marathon. You're not exerting yourself in the same way that you're running, but it's just the constant movement all day long, and what it puts on your feet is really a lot.
Yeah. And so then what was the motivation for the 30-day fast? What made you decide to do it? Lose weight. Okay.
I had dropped a lot of weight in the process of doing this walking stuff. And after I moved, I went to Wisconsin. I just spent a lot of time doing the show every day, and I became very sedentary, and I gained a lot of weight back. And I just reached a point where it's like, okay, I got to do something. And the fast is really just started. The intent is to just sort of kickstart things, to do something, because I'm really good at being extreme about things. I'm not very good at being moderate about things. So I'm going to lose weight. Then, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just not going to freaking eat for a month. That I can do. Watch your portions every meal? No.
Yeah.
So I have a plan. So the week before I started fasting, I only ate meat and eggs, removed all carbohydrates, because basically as you're fasting, your body is going to be, I wanted a high fat diet to get my body adjusted to fat consumption, because that's, you become fat adapted as you fast. And then after the fast, so when I'm done, the goal is to go 30 days. The max I will go is 40 days. Because I think beyond that, it's probably a bit too much. There are people that have gone longer. And then I'm probably just going to go down to one meal a day. That's at least for the first month, I'm just going to have a ribeye every day. So again, high fat, protein. And I've also started working out more. And the genesis behind this was basically, I kind of just looked at how people, their advice for this stuff, and they all break down into three different things. Change what you eat less, work out more. And those things are not mutually exclusive. You can do all three. And so that's basically what I'm doing.
Yeah. Have you found how have you found the process of adapting to using fat as a source of energy rather than carbs?
It's not hard. I was pretty meat heavy with what I was doing anyhow, but it really wasn't a problem for me. I think if you're eating a very high carb diet, your body needs to get rid of carbohydrates. You can't have sugar floating around your body, right? Too much glucose, you'll go into a coma. And people always say, well, it's your carbs are your body's preferred food source. Well, not really. It consumes it first because it needs to get rid of it. And you don't store very much in terms of glucose in your, there's some in your muscles or some in your liver. If you're fasting, you'll get rid of that in about a day.
Yep. Maybe
more or less. And then your body turns to fat, of which that's why we store fat instead of carbs. We don't have sugar nodules hanging off our body. We have fat because it's also more, dense calorically. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a problem with it at all.
Yeah. Marathon runners, like when you run a marathon, you need to consume, if you're using sugar and carbs as an energy source, you have to consume them because your body literally will use up all of it within that time frame.
There's been some marathon runners that I've been paying attention to that have just been doing this on fat. Like one did they did 5 marathons in 5 days fasted.
Yeah.
Just to kind of show that it could be done. I'm not saying necessarily if you're trying to set world records or win races, that may not be the best. I understand that the how quick you can access energy via carbs would probably be more efficient for something like that. But I know that there are athletes now that are realizing that you can use fat as opposed to carbs But that's really kind of all. I know it can be done. I don't really know a whole lot beyond that as far as like how effective it is in terms of being competitive.
Yeah, I think in terms of endurance sports, it can be comparable, but in explosive type sports, I believe carbs are going to be better. And that's
the guy who's the strongest man in the world, Eddie
Hall.
Yeah, so he just went to an all carnivore diet, and his strength went up.
Okay, maybe I stand corrected.
So again, and I should say these people are kind of on the outer edge of performance that I don't think are relevant to your average people. But my view of it was always like first principles. And if you look at like what people were eating before the agricultural revolution for hundreds of thousands of years, humans were hyper carnivores. That you can tell this too because they can do stable isotope analysis on bones, and they're looking for nitrogen 15, and they can very easily tell where you are on the trophic hierarchy by the amount of nitrogen 15 you have. Herbivores have very little, carnivores have more, and then carrion birds and scavengers have even more because they eat carnivores when they're dead. And what they found from ancient humans is that we had higher levels of nitrogen 15 than even like a wolf or a tiger because we could eat wolves and tigers. The only thing that is more were things like vultures and carrion birds.
I did not know that. I assumed that we were herbivores, like eating like leaves and stuff. But I guess that's interesting.
Well, when we weren't humans, but what made us humans, and this is where you want to draw the line, like we evolved from apes.
Right.
We were a meat-eating ape. And that's what kind of developed our brains and allowed us to become not apes anymore and something else.
Right, because there's access to more energy, more calories.
Right. And that may have first happened. They think that it was probably scavenging and it was probably bone marrow. That they could, after a lion eats something, we came from the savannah. They could crack open the bone with a stone and access that marrow, which is a lot of fat. And that early humans were really basically fat hunters, which is why they hunted large game. They hunted the oryx, the mastodon, things like that, because they had so much fat. But that's a whole nother discussion, really. But
right.
I did an episode once, cruciferous vegetables, which people think of, eat your greens, lettuce, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, do not exist in the wild. They have been created through centuries of crossbreeding by humans to become edible. So this notion of stone men going around eating broccoli doesn't exist. And if anyone's ever had a garden, good luck trying to grow lettuce or cabbage or something because everything is going to eat it. So it's not really there were berries and other root vegetables, tubers that humans would eat. But that's about it. It was not leaves at all because those were, go try eating a leaf. Think of what, if you walked outside right now into a forest, what could you eat?
Right. Very little. Yeah. Well, I do like the first principles thinking. I try to think that way, though obviously now I'm reconsidering everything with the vegetables that I eat.
And it's not to say that cruciferous vegetables are like poison or anything. Just that they didn't, we made them. Mm-hmm. They don't exist in nature. And we made them so we could eat them, so they could be palatable. Because if you look at the ancient varietals that it came from, it looks nothing like it. And a lot of people are shocked that all of these things are kind of related. But they are. They were just crossbred and bred for different attributes, which is how they became so different.
Yeah, I know that to be the case with like wheat and corn, is that it was like a grass that was just then bred into being edible and having these like grains grow on it. What is something that you are currently struggling with?
I think the thing that's always, the last 2 years have been pretty good for me. The show's grown financially. It's become a lot more stable after all the stuff I was going through around the pandemic. Now the thing for me from like a business standpoint is growing the show. And I've always said that there's kind of orders of magnitude if you're doing content online. What you do to get 10 people to pay attention to you. Well, that's easy. We all know 10 people. 100, far extended group of people we know. We have 100 people. 1,000's a bit different, but you could still interact with 1,000 people. 10,000, that's something else. 100,000 is completely different. There's no hope you could possibly. So every order of magnitude requires a different approach to how you grow and market. And my show has gotten big enough where now I have to start looking at bigger and different things to grow my show. So I'm going to be doing a pretty big investment this summer in a couple different platforms. One of which is this very large online site that does quizzes. I've been a member of the site for 14 years. And I'm like, this is my audience. You know, they run pub trivia contests all over the country. I'm like, these are the people that would like my show. So I reached out to them and I was like, can I do a sponsorship with you guys? And they came back and I've talked to them and they're like, this is like the best fit we've ever had. This is perfect for us. So that is going to be rolling out soon. I'm always looking for podcasts where, you know, maybe they don't have a lot of advertising, where I could approach them and say, hey, you got a pretty good show and I think there's a good fit with the audience. Could I buy advertising on your show? So that's kind of the thing I'm doing right now. There's also ways for me to expand what I'm doing in terms of revenue. I've always had the idea of launching a YouTube channel, which is not putting my episodes online, but doing actual videos. There's a lot of educational videos out there that are just voiceover with B-roll footage. And I think, you know, I already have the voiceover for over 1,500 episodes. So there's plenty of content I would just need help with making the actual video. But there's a lot of things like that where I think I could expand the business, because right now it's me. That's it. I have no assistants, no help. It's all just me, which on one hand is great. The fact that you can grow a business and scale it without having any, you know, employees is wonderful. But it also limits what you do because I'm busy putting out a show every day and I don't have a whole lot of room for anything else.
Mm-hmm. Does that involve a lot of editing? Does your show?
No, almost none. So my show is a scripted monologue show. Mm-hmm. So there are no guests. So there's no ums and ahs, no pauses, awkward moments. There's none of that. So what I do is I first write the script and then I sit down and I read it. And then as I'm reading it, if I flub up or want to do something differently, I just move the waveform back. And then I start at that point and I just keep doing that until I'm done. And when I'm done, I'm done. That's all the editing I need to do. So I can do I'd say 15 minutes of audio content in 25 to 30 minutes sitting in front of the mic.
And the majority of the work is just creating the script for it.
Writing and research is the vast majority of the work. The actual recording is pretty trivial for me.
Is the writing different when you're thinking about reading it out loud versus, say, writing a blog post?
Yes. Writing for the ear is much more forgiving than writing for the eye. One, you don't have to worry about typos. And we always talk in a first draft. Mm-hmm. This conversation was not planned. You didn't write down and think about what you're going to say, and then you sent it to me, and then I replied. We're just talking. And so we are accustomed to this every day of our lives of maybe the grammar is not perfect, or you know, maybe there are cliches or expressions of speech that we use. Those are normal. You don't put that in writing that people are going to read. But if I'm going to be speaking it, I'll put those things in all the time, even though I would never put that in, say, a published article. So you can get away with a lot more for the ear than you can with the eye, which actually makes it easier to write a script because I'm not as nitpicky about little things.
Yeah, I realized that now that you say it, it's funny. I posted a YouTube video a couple weeks ago about a camping trip that I did, and I wrote up a voiceover script. And I honestly was like, this is not that great. And then I recorded it and put it with the video. And I was like, this is like, it's fucking awesome. This is like it works super well. And I think it was exactly that. It's much more forgiving.
And I'll stick to the script about, I would say 98% of the, 97, 98%. I'll ad lib a few things as I'm reading it, if it just seems to flow and make more sense that way. Mm-hmm. But it's mostly the script.
What does your dream life look like?
I don't know. I'm kind of doing it right now. I literally have a show where hundreds of thousands of people listen to me talk about whatever the hell I want every day. I make decent money. I have no debt. I've been around the world. I have been on the white sand beaches. It's not all it's cracked up to be. There's no food or fresh water on those beaches. So the fantasy disappears pretty quick once you're there. I think you have to be doing something. People have this idea of not working, like, oh, I want to make passive income and not work. There's a lot of work that goes into passive income. And I'm not entirely certain that being passive is necessarily a good thing. That being busy, being active, producing something is valuable, whatever that might be. And you've probably seen this where people retire. You know, they've had a job for a long time. Charles Schultz, the guy who was a cartoonist who made Peanuts, retired and then died like 2 weeks later. And there's all sorts of things like that where somebody works forever and then they retire and then they just die. They have no purpose. So yeah, I'm very content with what I'm doing right now.
There's a book, Ikigai. It's like a Japanese concept, and it's about how like people in these certain areas of Japan live very long lives. It's one of the blue zones, and one of their principles is like having continuing to work, never really retiring, and that actually gives people longer lives because they just have a reason to continue living.
Yeah, I don't, and populations are decreasing across the world. People aren't having as many children. There's a demographic collapse, which means that the populations are going to keep getting older. When I started my company in the 90s, it was like, oh, you don't want to hire someone who's in their 50s. You want to hire people in their 20s. And now that I'm in my 50s, I don't see that attitude the same way there used to be. In fact, people in their 20s now are kind of looked on with suspicion that they're all sort of lazy. Mm-hmm. So I think that's only going to continue. There's going to be more opportunities as you get older because the population's getting older. And I don't think we can afford for people to be spending a third of their life doing nothing.
Well, let's end it there. Gary, I appreciate you coming on. Do you want to quick tell the listeners where they can keep up with you?
Wherever you're listening to this podcast, go search for Everything Everywhere Daily. That's my show, and you can learn something new about things you didn't even know you didn't know every single day.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. Bye, everybody.